Hello and welcome to another episode of ABM Under the Hood. I'm joined today by my colleague James. James is a senior art director here at Strategic. Thanks very much for joining me today, James.
Thanks for having me on. Really excited to chat all things creative with you. Really excited.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's the topic of today's episode. We're going to be discussing the creative side of ABM, in particular with a focus around why creativity and why kind of a creative approach is so important to the success of ABM programs, and talking a little bit about different types of activities that you can do from a kind of creative perspective. But yeah, so to start things off, James, in terms of the importance of creativity and the impact of creativity on ABM, what do you think is the kind of benefits of bringing this sort of creative approach to the table?
Yeah, I think that's a really good starting point. I think if we look back maybe 10 years ago in terms of the B2B kind of marketing space and where B2B sat as advertising, it wasn't always the most exciting of places to actually start advertising in. I think majority of people, if you look back at that kind of time, they'll see B2B as very much white papers, email marketing, very much kind of just here's a picture, here's a bit of text. It didn't feel very engaging. And so over the last 10 years, we've seen a big jump from B2B audiences being treated very much as B2C audiences as well. So they want to get engaged with this creativity. They want to get talked to like a real person. And one of the easiest ways to do that is changing how you talk to people in a visual language. If you want people to engage with your brand, you have to break away from the norms. And we're seeing that a lot with some of the clients that even we're working with. They don't just want the same campaigns they run over and over and over again. They want something different. They want something that stands out. And it's like we're saying, I suppose, with the different channels, we've also seen an explosion on what's possible in terms of what places that we can play in. If we look back, whereas beforehand, it might have just been, like I said before, a simple landing page and a simple email marketing ad. Those channels have changed. LinkedIn has become so much more of a vibrant space to play in. And there's huge opportunities for us to really engage with our audiences and do something different just by having kind of that visual aspect added to it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really good point. And when it comes to that kind of in terms of what B2B has kind of learned from B2C in a way, that seems to be the kind of direction that we're headed in the moment, right? I think B2C has been. I don't know if it's ahead of the game or if B2B is behind, but essentially there's always been a gap between what the B2C type of advertisers and marketers do versus what's happening in B2B. But I think that gap is narrowing now, right? And there's a lot of things that are coming, probably partly down to, as you say, these channels that are available to us now that maybe weren't available previously. Is certainly something that allows us to bring some of that creativity that we have seen in B2C into B2B, right?
Exactly. And I suppose one of the other things as well is there's been a lot more attention given to how marketing as a function works within kind of B2B organizations. B2C has always had the run ahead because it's how do you directly engage with consumers. They've always had that kind of, I suppose, 10-second head start just because they need to be on trends. They need to be ahead of the game. They need to be talking to people straight away. They need to be capturing engagement. B2B has kind of been able to sit back on its laurels a bit because they've always been associated, like I said before, white papers, emails. There's not been that sense of urgency to actually talk to the right people at the right time. Whereas that's all flipped on its head now. I think if anything, B2B is now trying to not just catch up, but outpace B2C because they're so aware of content hasn't been up to scratch for the engagement side. I'm not saying it's been bad, but it's just not been the right tone and the right style to actually engage with people. So now they're having to keep innovating, keep doing something new, keep looking for new methodologies. Something might come up within the B2C space, and B2B marketers are already looking at how that can impact their audiences and their market. So it's really that key differentiation that's happened over, like I said, I see it more over the last 10 years than anything. Yeah. I think that's kind of where I've seen that space grow. But yeah, it's an exciting time to play in it, an exciting time to actually start building campaigns for these people because there's such a sense of excitement around it as well. There's a real want to do creative things. There's a real want to actually dive in and deeper and do something a bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you see that with our clients that there is that kind of slightly braver attitude from clients when it comes to what they are willing to try from a creative side of things?
Absolutely. I think it's always that difficult challenge. And I suppose with ABM as a framework, one of the things that we always say is, because it's such a targeted campaign and because it's such a focused campaign, you're only reaching a specific set of accounts. You're more open. That's how we position it. We're more open to break the guidelines, flex the guidelines a little bit, just to do something a bit more exciting. And ABM is where we kind of are given those tools, and clients want that, because clients, not to say that the marketing hasn't worked so far, but they really want to see what their marketing can do. It's more as like, ABM is such a good testing ground to kind of say, okay, we're launching with this new message, obviously from the value propositions, creative copywriting, creative design. We're combining all of these things into a campaign. You're always running a test on it, in my eyes. You're just doing this small test. You've got a captured audience. Everything's so specific. Does it resonate? Does it work? Does that kind of flip from a certain level of, I don't know, if you look at adding in just real simple design effects, like just brightening up the colors of the brand, adding in gradients to add a little bit of depth, changing the photography style. How does that impact? How does that change the conversations? And I think that's what people want to see, because they want to see something different anyway. And having that ability to just have this interesting way to play and test and see the results kind of almost as a live feed is perfect for brands, and both for the big organizations, because they get to experiment, they get to have a sandbox moment for just testing out different strategies, testing out different styles. We've seen it across clients. I think the bolder approaches do pay off, and it's just more proof that they can go back with as well and say, this has worked, this is where we've got really good engagement, this is where we're seeing value. And it opens up the conversations as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I definitely feel like there's a mentality that, because the ABM is almost like a, as you say, sort of sandbox. It's like a kind of separate entity from the main marketing and advertising activities of the brand, and therefore there is that slight more kind of leeway with what can be done, because, as you say, it's only going to be seen by a handful of people, generally speaking, versus the kind of more mass market type activities. So there is a little bit more willingness to risk, things, I suppose, which makes, absolutely makes it fun for us, working with these businesses, right, to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of when you're kind of thinking about these types of creative ideas and kind of building out this kind of, concepts and things like that, if you put yourself in the shoes of someone, in-house looking to build out a kind of creative ABM campaign concept idea, something like that, like, where should they start? What's the first thing that you look to draw on to get these ideas? Is that a little bit more kind of is it sort of coming from the ether a little bit? Is it something that's not necessarily easy to describe?
It's a tough one. I think if you're kind of that in-house stakeholder, the one bit of advice, I suppose the key bit of advice is get the right people kind of in the right place at the right time. I think that's the key thing. Because like you said, with the ABM campaigns, it can end up looking so different from anything that they might have done before. And the key thing to note with like ABM campaigns and concepts is they're not just pulled out of the air. We don't kind of just say, this is the style that we want to go with. We've changed X, Y, Z for no reason. It's all very much grounded in data and insights. I think that's what one of the key differentiators is. Obviously, there's so much work behind the creative campaigns that sometimes it can be a bit of a shock to the system if you've got someone that hasn't been in that full journey and they're just seeing it for the first time. And it could be as simple as someone from the internal branding team, or it could be as simple as there's someone who sits within the marketing team or within the marketing team as a whole, but sits within a slightly different team and they're getting them in for the first time. It will be a shock to the system and it will put you on the back foot, especially if it's, again, different colors, brighter, function, really different. So having the right people along for the full journey really does help. And that's not even like a creative thing. That's just in general. Bring people onto the journey, because that's what we do. We tend to building things like tissue sessions and playbacks and all these things so that the client themselves are along for the journey. And it just helps to build the familiarity with it. It's not such a, like I said, such a big shock, but you then have more of an understanding of how we've got from A to B as well. You're along that story. So it really doesn't then come as both a surprise, and it shows that we have taken all the understandings from things like the value propositions, from things like the insights. You understand what audiences you're playing in. Because obviously even simple things, if you're targeting entertainment sectors versus financial sectors, there's whole different ways of how you're going to be talking to those clients. So we want to make sure that everyone is kind of clued up on the same level, so that when they actually come to those decision makings, it isn't tough for them, and it makes it easier to sell in as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because and one thing that I've definitely started to realize over the years working with clients is how much of ABM is about internal stakeholder management, whether that's with the sales team and sales and marketing alignment, which I talk about all the time, or whether it's with C-suite and executive stakeholders that are kind of maybe holding the purse strings, or as you say, potentially just other team members that maybe only get involved very, very sporadically with the program, and seeing these things in kind of little bursts. How do you go about ensuring that those people don't come in and feel completely alienated from the activities, or don't understand what's going on? That's absolutely, it seems so crucial, I think, to the success of programs, but also just being able to do the programs in the way that you want to do them, right? So yeah, I think that's absolutely a really good point. And I think what you said there around data kind of led approaches, from our side, we obviously, I mean, that's kind of my role in the business, and my team's role is to build that picture of the accounts, understand the target accounts, the contacts within the accounts, understand as much as possible from a sort of data and insights perspective, who we're going after, why, what's the challenge, what's this pain point, all of that kind of stuff, right? So that's kind of where we come in and feed that information to you guys on the creative side. But how do you find that kind of transition from the data and insight side of things into the creative works in practice? Do you find that you are requiring, is it quite an easy process to sort of see that view of where an account's at? What does that mean in how it's going to translate into a creative concept? Or is it something that you've had to obviously practice over time, you've had experience doing?
I think it's definitely a mix. Luckily I've kind of sat in a similar kind of role within companies for long enough that it does feel like second nature. But there's still a lot of work that goes into it, because it's that key understanding of who you're trying to talk to, I think, makes the biggest difference to the success of a campaign. And like you said, the strategy, I think creatives will take credit for a lot of things, because obviously the end output is the shiny thing that everyone looks at. But realistically, I've said it before on calls, the creative is almost like the cherry on top of the cake. It's both such a small part of the workings that have gone into it, but there's such a bigger visual element, not visual, but there's such a bigger element to it. The main structure is the strategy, the insights, the data, all those different things. And being able to actually go in and pinpoint what you need and what specific element of the strategy actually resonates, and you can see, okay, this is going to talk to this client really well. It sometimes takes a little bit longer than others. Sometimes you can be sat there looking at a brief for 2-3 days and hitting your head against the wall and saying, there's something here, but it's not jumping out at you. Whereas other times, for other briefs, we've looked at the value proposition, obviously, like creative and content working so closely together. You're both sitting there, you're both seeing the same value proposition, and there's a snapshot of a phrase that jumps out to you, and you both land on it immediately and say, that's it, that's our kind of hook for the campaign.
Yeah.
How do you build it out? It all just trickles down into one seamless kind of vision, as it were. So it's always that. It's how long is a piece of string kind of.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be a whole painful whirlwind of things.
I find it so interesting that because from my perspective, what happens is either myself or my team, we provide you with that kind of that snapshot of everything, all the insights and account data and whatever else, and then pass it across. And then the next thing I see is an idea, an actual fleshed out thing. Sometimes I get involved in the kind of brainstorming sessions and things like that, but more often than not, what happens is I'll provide you with all of that information, and then I see this concept come out off the back of it, and I'm always just kind of like, it's always a big a pleasant surprise, a sort of shock to see like how what I've done has then translated into that is always quite it's a big jump, I find. But I guess the other element of that, and the thing that I always find quite impressive with what you guys do is the ability to not kind of fall into cliche and the same types of patterns of creative and content that we see all the time, right? So I very rarely see from you guys, if we're doing a pharmaceutical campaign, people in white lab coats and holding test tubes and all of that kind of stuff. It's not often that you kind of fall back on that kind of cliche stuff. And so how do you, is that something that you're kind of mindful of, that you're trying to avoid that, or is it something that you just naturally don't lean towards?
I think it's things like that are a great question, because it's also a bit like you're trying to track back in your mind and be like, how does it work?
Yeah.
It's what, like you said, everything is quite ethereal, try and pull out.
Yeah.
But pharmaceutical is a great kind of example, because there's so many restraints that until you do some pharmaceutical work, you don't know about.
Yeah.
But to make things stand out, I think the best way that we do it is, like you've mentioned before, brainstorming an idea is the key aspect to any creative build. Because I think creatives can get so siloed in their own world and their own presence, they'll only see things from one viewpoint. Mm-hmm. But being able to actually like put down ideas onto paper and not just have your own idea, have other people's ideas around it, just helps broaden the narrative and helps broaden the conversation, so that you are less likely to land on the same thing over and over again.
Right.
It's also obviously like with the team, you have so many different viewpoints, and I think sometimes, as someone that, like I said, I've done this for a few years now, I'm not going to say I've got the most experience under my belt, but I've done this for a few years now. You could easily fall into the same pattern of just rehashing the same work over and over again. Mm-hmm. But when you're working with other team members, you can basically pick their brains as well. That's the benefit of it.
Yep.
You get their point of view, and it might be something as simple as they just put down a certain image on the brainstorming kind of mood board, and that immediately ignites someone else's idea, and that immediately ignites someone else's thought process, and it's this trickle down system of, okay, it all then starts linking up. And then it's our job as the creative lead to take those away and just build the actual picture behind it. Mm-hmm. So it is a collaborative approach. It's not, there's no one person that's in charge of it. There's no one person that comes up with the idea. It is 100%, there's a team behind it that actually builds out the ideas.
Yeah.
And that's what keeps it fresh, realistically. It's just that the different viewpoints, the different life experience, everything that kind of comes together to then shape the creative. And it's an interesting process. I'm not going to say, like I said, it's how long is a piece of string in terms of it doesn't necessarily take a specific format, mm-hmm. and it doesn't take a certain amount of time, but it does follow the same principles in the sense of you put the idea down onto paper, and it's just the scaling it out. I think that's the main thing, is you scale out the ideas and then you just build out from that almost central point to say, okay, this is then the fully scoped idea. And then you take that and kind of visualize it. And like I said, you avoid the cliches, but sometimes cliches work. It depends on the kind of campaign that you're going for. So
that's true. Yeah.
Sometimes they do fall into place, and you can use them to your advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a good point, actually. Yeah. So in terms of that sort of next stage, then, so obviously from your perspective, you'll be creating like a concept, a theme, a kind of look and feel, and then when it comes to turning that into something, a bit more physical, the actual kind of tactics, assets, channel kind of engagement strategies, all of that kind of stuff. So what does that process look like for you when you've kind of had a creative theme, say in our case signed off by a client? If it was for someone working in-house, they would have it confirmed by whoever their internal stakeholders are. You get that creative theme, that concept, that idea signed off. How do you then go about moving that into something tangible, actual assets?
I think that's where, again, it's that kind of big team picture, because it's a perfect opportunity to, in the perfect world, is like realign with everyone. So you've got the creative, the copywriter, the strategists, and obviously, like for us, we then work on a process of, is there some sort of key event or asset that they want to produce? Is there something they've got in mind? Mm-hmm. We'll obviously do things like the gap analysis, and we'll run kind of audits just to see, is there any piece of content that might be missing? So do they have a wealth of blog posts, but they don't actually have a good ebook? Do they have tons of written content? Do they not have any video content? we'll obviously go through and analyze those in tandem with the kind of, do they have an event that they're going to be hosting? Do we think it's suitable for us to have a presence at that event, or is there content we can create for that event? And that kind of informs it. You almost have the kind of destination that you want them to go to, and then you build it back from there. So obviously within our framework, we say that educate is our key milestone. Educate can take a lot of different formats, but we tend to say a digital kind of experience works best, because it doesn't matter where you're based. It doesn't matter what your kind of goals are. It doesn't matter if you've got tons of information or little information. You can still build a decent digital experience out of those kind of key components.
Yeah.
And then it's just, how do you drive the audience there, and then how do you continue the journey after they're in that kind of digital space. So I suppose when we come to doing things like our awareness stage, it's obviously the easiest methodology is social. It's kind of that social awareness and social ads. So we'll build out different ad set types, and a lot of that as well comes not just from specific audience learnings, but the bigger picture. Obviously, things LinkedIn has said over the years that it's gone from static ads to video ads. Now there's more of a focus on document ads and carousels. We obviously build a lot of those learnings into how we build the assets, because it's important for us to make sure whatever asset that we're building and however we want to publish assets or kind of build the campaign, that they're still getting the best traction possible. We don't want it to be a case of actually just kind of, I don't know, just scrolling past a static when a video could have worked and grabbed their engagement first or further. Same thing with carousels. Like, we don't want to necessarily push them down a route that, okay, this is kind of old hat, as it were, with the static app. We want to give them something that might be slightly new, and we'll just drive more of that engagement. So we'll kind of, you kind of have to go forward and then work your way backwards to actually decide how to get them there. Obviously, it's that further stage as well. So how do we want them to react after the plan? Is there a specific CTA that we want them to go to? All of those different things then add up, and that will kind of inform how we move them through further as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, makes sense. And so I guess you kind of, what you're saying there is starting with the objective of the program, right, or the campaign, and then working back from that. I mean, that's definitely, absolutely a good idea. And in terms of the channels, then, so we obviously are kind of constantly keeping an eye on the developments in different, channels and spaces and content types and all of that kind of stuff. What I find often is that, particularly on like LinkedIn and social and that kind of stuff, is that a tactic will kind of come onto the scene, a new tactic will appear, it gets really kind of jumped on, overused to the point where then it's no longer effective. That seems to happen kind of rinse and repeat with LinkedIn. But is there anything that you think, are there any types of tactics or channels or content assets or creative styles or anything like that you think is almost kind of evergreen? It kind of screams, pure kind of quality, and regardless of the trends and the timings and all of that sort of stuff, it's going to be, broadly effective if it's done in the right way. Is there anything that you think about in that way? Yeah, I think the big thing is, and it's not a specific to ABM kind of thing, but I think live person experiences and live person events are always going to be the ones that pay off. Not just from you have the people having the conversation at the events, but I think people sometimes forget that the events themselves are basically content generators. You have speakers, you have booths, you have people running demonstrations, you have all of these things going on simultaneously. So over the space of 2 days, you could have 3 months worth of content. And that's something that no matter how the industry changes and how people change, they're still going to want to do in-person events. They're still going to want to have that kind of interaction with people. They're still going to want to go see speakers. They're still going to want to meet up with peers and have those kind of, not just the formal and professional interactions, but very much personal interactions as well. That I don't think is going to change anytime soon. And obviously, with the last few years being as they were in the pandemic, and that obviously like grinding to a halt very quickly, we are seeing them come back. I mean, seeing them come back bigger and better than they have been before. And that's where I think I don't think anyone will underplay or undervalue how much an event can generate interest and generate kind of awareness, but it's that content aspect of it. It's that you can really do interesting things with the content that comes off the back of an event. Even sound bites, I think people underestimate the value of a sound bite, because if you just added certain animations to it or built kind of different carousels on it, built on kind of the expressions that people are using, again, it's more and more content. You just have this bank you can refer to, and great way to start conversations on LinkedIn. Like, obviously, we've all experienced kind of from our own separate brand building and kind of our own presence on LinkedIn. The best way to start a conversation with people is to tag people and start actually interacting with them.
Yeah.
So if you're having that ability on LinkedIn where you've got generated content and you can just tag people and kind of start these little micro conversations across your feed, that's going to pay off dividends for you, and that's going to start the conversations, either pick up conversations, that's going to continue those conversations as they move through.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's such a good point, and 100%, you know, post lockdowns and all of that kind of stuff, I think there was a real boost and interest in live events again. I think it's kind of leveling out, but leveling out at a high level, right? And there's still always going to be that want for it. And I think when the point you made there around it being a content generator in and of itself, I think is so important, because I think businesses often look at events as expensive, resource heavy, you know, takes a lot of time to get things prepared for them, blah blah blah, and that is often true. You know, you can do things you can always find cheaper ways of doing things, quicker ways of doing things, you know, whatever. But broadly speaking, as an activity, it's going to be more expensive and you know, resource heavy than a digital activity, for example. However, the ROI on that activity potentially is so much more significant, not just from as you say, the perspective of being able to generate conversations and leads and relationships and whatever else, but also from the perspective of, yeah, that's your content calendar sorted for the next 3-6 months, you know, if you play it right. And so you're actually saving yourself a huge amount of time and resource in the long run, even though there maybe is more investment up front. So yeah, it's not for everyone as well. You know, there's obviously going to be businesses that for whatever reason that it isn't the right approach. And I think some types of target markets as well, events aren't necessarily the right approach, because, you know, it's a bit more of a closed system, or it's a bit more kind of, you know, there's or sometimes it's that there's actually kind of like there's too many steps involved in the buying process, too many different people involved in the buying process. So trying to create an event for all of them just isn't going to work. It's just, you know, nothing to no one type thing. So but yeah, for a lot of businesses, I think events is a huge positive approach if done well. So that you kind of said, we're talking there about an activity that is almost sort of evergreen in terms of the future of creative in ABM. What are you seeing or what do you think will be the direction that things head in terms of tactics, channels, approaches, that kind of stuff? Obviously, it's impossible to have that question without talking about AI, and it's something that we bring up on pretty much every podcast episode. But presumably, there's going to be some element of that you think is going to infiltrate into the creative approach in ABM. But anything on that side of things, and anything else that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think AI is obviously an interesting one, and like you said, it is top of everyone's list of things to look out for over the next few years. I don't know how much AI is going to take. It's not going to be a central pillar in terms of how ABM and creative is going to run. I think AI for creatives is very much just going to be a tool. So AI would come in super handy when we're talking about like personalization. Obviously, if you're doing big sets of personalization mapping, AI, just getting someone to almost do the artworking, churn and burn style work, that's where it's going to come in super handy. And it's going to really help just kind of set a foundation, I suppose, if creatives that might not necessarily have hands-on coding experience can upload designs into certain AI generators, then actually build out landing pages, even just to test on them. That's going to be the way forward. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops through. But I think overall, in terms of ABM, I've had this discussion with a few different people, but I personally think that ABM on a kind of one-to-many level is just going to become marketing. Like, that is going to be how marketing is going to run over the next kind of 5-10 years. One-to-many is going to become the focus, because it allows for a certain level of personalization. It allows for conversations to be had. And it is, in reality, the cheaper option in one-to-many, one-to-few, one-to-one. but it's scalable as well. It allows companies to, especially, and I suppose linked back to AI, it allows companies to scale it as well. They don't just have to be stuck in you've got 150 accounts, that's all you can do.
Yeah.
With AI, there's potential to scale up to thousands of accounts and actually run it that way, which I think would be an absolute benefit. And one-to-many is going to change in definition, but ABM is going to become more valuable in that one-to-one, one-to-few space. I think that's where we're going to see creativity really thrive, because people are going to want those really tailored experiences. And I don't mean like big just experiences like events and all that kind of stuff, but I personally think the DM's going to have a bit of a comeback. People are going to want those almost personalized desktop experiences, however they come to fruition, whether they're gifts or whether they're I don't know, something tactile, where there's even a video, TV in your car, that kind of thing. Those kind of desktops and those kind of interactions are going to become more and more valuable, because I think people are going to get, I won't say sick of it, but I think people are going to get quite overwhelmed with the barrage of kind of normal marketing. So to cut through the noise, people are going to want those very personalized experiences. And that's where ABM is going to come in to the forefront and kind of say, yeah, cool. Yeah, we can do that. We can talk to the people because we've got all these insights. We know who they are. We can tailor these experiences to them. And that's where the value is going to really be. That's where creativity is going to become more important, because it's like we said before, if you're talking to a one-to-one, you can flex the creativity a little bit further. You don't have to necessarily stick to those guidelines, because no one else is going to see it. As long as it's got the key foundations for your brand in it, you can do whatever you want with it. You can build some really beautiful experiences with it, and that's going to pay off, because I think it's going to help with that brand recognition. It's going to help those conversations start, and it's going to really push to the forefront the fact that your brand isn't just a one-dimensional, okay, we're seeing it on LinkedIn. It's three-dimensional. You're seeing it in real life, you're experiencing it, you're able to be tactile with it. You get more of an understanding of how the brand works as well.
Yeah I think you're spot on, because what we've definitely noticed as a kind of trend in terms of engagement rates and that kind of stuff is that email is just getting harder and harder by the day. Email is not, people get so many emails now, people ignore so many emails now. I do myself, unless you've got the perfect message at the perfect time to cut through. And obviously that starts with the subject line, right? But, it has to be so absolutely spot on that otherwise it's just not gonna land. And even with all of the insights work that we do, all of the value proposition work we do, the messaging definition and all of that kind of stuff, even then we're not guaranteed success with email, because other people are doing the same thing as well. Other businesses are doing that process, right? So there's definitely ways of succeeding, but it's often there's some luck involved in it as well, right? And so
really, if we look at it in terms of what would you rather open? Would you rather open an email that feels very generic, or would you rather open a personalized gift box? You're going to go with the personalized gift box, let's be real. So
absolutely,
people were at the right space at the right time. But I don't really see it kind of be the mainstay for creative marketing going forward.
Not for creative marketing. Absolutely, I think it's something that potentially, as a sales tool, it still has its place, right? But even then, I think sales teams are having to get quite innovative with the approach, right? You see things like personalized video, you see things like these kind of personalized GIF creators, or whiteboard tools and stuff like that you can kind of add into email. You might have digital gift cards and things like that. You might have there's loads of things even then that potentially sales teams are having to use to try and cut through that noise. I think it's not. Yeah, from a creative perspective, email isn't the future of marketing, right? But it will always have its place in some ways, but it's not about that kind of instigation of engagement and stuff. But I think the social side of things and the digital side is always going to kind of be there, or certainly for the next couple of decades at least, I would think. But the channels will change potentially, and maybe the formats and things like that, but broadly that style of marketing will still exist. But in terms of creative, input on that, it may well just be, as you say, that there's going to be that level of scalability that can be introduced. Right now, when you kind of try to run campaigns, you can do personalized campaigns into as many accounts as you've got the time and resource to do, right? Which tends not to be a huge amount. But if you bring the AI stuff into the mix there, you could potentially be looking at doing personalized, or what feels like personalized campaigns to hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of accounts at once and individuals at once. Which, that's where, as you say, that kind of one-to-many, what one-to-many is going to kind of evolve into. And I think that's it. I wonder almost if it's going to split off a little bit from ABM, that one-to-many there will almost become a bit of a gap between, like, because sometimes one-to-many is already called kind of like programmatic ABM, right? Or automated ABM. And actually, I think essentially there could end up being this kind of gap, this kind of chasm between the automated side of ABM and the completely manual, personalized side of ABM. And that might be how it kind of develops. And creative will be the potential kind of the sort of battleground for that, almost, I think, in a way.
Yeah, I think so. I think brands are going to be fighting as the market gets more and more kind of saturated. Brands are going to be fighting more for that real estate, and one of the ways that brands are going to be fighting that real estate is in. We always refer to it as on LinkedIn. It's that stop the scroll effect. You're going through your feed and then something jumps out and you stop, you read, because I think that's where it's important to understand the human engagement is, especially on LinkedIn, is you do see so many ads and text posts and all that kind of thing during the day. So anything as an image that stops you scrolling, you then take in the headline, you take in a post copy. That's what builds the engagement. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, with the battleground of all of these advertisers and all of these consumers kind of moving forwards and doing something different, and trying to fight for that number one spot, then of course the only way that they're going to really differentiate themselves is that visual style. Mm-hmm. How are they going to push their visual style? How are they going to do something slightly different? Mm-hmm. Are they going to take it to, I mean, who knows what the technology is going to be like in 10 years, but is there a scope for there to be like super personalized ads that the text on the image itself is switched out and kind of changed per person and like category that they're talking to?
Yeah.
We don't really know, but that is going to be how it's going to change, and that's going to be how it's made to be different.
Yeah. Or even real-time change, that's the thing that I think potentially we could start seeing it with the development of AI and the development of, processing power and all of that kind of stuff. Like we see it in some cases already with this kind of like switched up, personalized, real-time ads that change dynamically depending on who's involved and all of that kind of stuff. But the scale of that is quite, it's either low scale or very expensive depending on but what you tend not to have is the ability to do cheap dynamic advertising at scale. And I think that's potentially something that might start happening, is that we start your behavior on LinkedIn, for example, in the moment as you're scrolling will influence not just the type of ad you see, but even influence how that ad changes for you in the moment, depending on what you're doing and how you're engaging with it. And I think also the key thing is about we live in an attention economy, right? And attention spans are lower than ever. I read a study the other day that said that they've gone from, I think it was 12 seconds down to 8 seconds, down to 5 seconds over the last 20 years or something like that. And it's just continuing to go down. So we're talking about, 5 seconds actually seems quite a lot for me in terms of being able to kind of stay on one thing for any moment. But that isn't going to be something that that's not going to change anytime soon because of the technology that we, are surrounded by. So it just makes it even more important to be able to stop the scroll, as you say, right? And actually, it becomes even more important. The visual side of things becomes more important. The shorter that attention span goes, right? Because obviously people will kind of jump onto things that speak to them from a messaging perspective, but we're getting to that point where the attention span is so short that they're not even going to read things. It's only if it visually stands out to them that they'll stop, right?
It's visuals, and like I said, it's visuals and tactics. The famous analogy is you've got a C-suite that is doing God knows what over a day. How do you capture his attention for like 2 minutes? And the realistic thing is you've got to capture that 2 minutes worth of attention within 1 second. How are you going to do it?
Yeah.
Like I said, it's the visual side of stuff. You have to try and push that visual narrative to really stand out, and not just stand out, but actually want them to engage with the product that you're selling.
Yeah.
And that's going to be that 2 minutes turns into 5 minutes, that 5 minutes turns into a conversation, that conversation turns into kind of that sales cycle. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's very simplified. That's very positive. How it works.
Yeah.
It's why things like desk drops, and it's why things like kind of the physical as well as the digital kind of experiences work so well, because you're capturing engagement and you're capturing their just kind of breaking away from that 2 minutes or 2 seconds of, oh, I might just scroll past an email.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, like you said, it doesn't capture the attention anymore. Mm-hmm. So actually having that point of engagement, and you can really get them to focus in on something and really get them to engage with it. That's where the value comes off, because that then puts them in the place of, okay, I'm engaging, I'm understanding, I'm learning. What do I want to do now? And then pointing them through a really clear journey to be like, come talk to us, come have a conversation.
Yeah.
That's where the value comes off from it.
Yeah.
That's where it's going to, as things become more and more saturated, it's going to be the differentiator between successful campaigns and the campaigns that kind of fade a little bit into the background.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's so important. We said there is not the capturing the attention or catching the attention is the one side of it, but it's also keeping that attention and pushing it into the right places. That is the difference, right? Because if it is just about catching attention, then you could do quite sort of, I don't know, shocking things or whatever, and things that aren't relevant and things that are just kind of completely at random and out of the box. But that's not going to keep them there and not going to take them to where you want to take them to. So it's about relevant attention grabbing stuff that moves them into the right places. Yeah,
I feel like we just scratched the surface, but no, really appreciate you having me on. Hopefully it's been of some use and some value, but hopefully I'll be back on again. Hopefully be back on.